Is that your husband? An old security lady said calmly. Come with me. You need to see this with your eyes. A story of betrayal, truth, and justice. The chandeliers in the Greenville General Hospital ballroom threw clean white light across 300 people who were dressed too well for a Tuesday evening, laughing too loudly for a room that was supposed to be about grief. Marble Webb stood near the arched entrance with a glass of sparkling water she had not touched in 40 minutes, watching the crowd the way she watched spreadsheets, slowly, looking for the thing that was slightly off. She had organized this gala herself for the third year in a row. Her father, George Webb, had been a donor to Greenville General for over 2 decades before his heart gave out in room 412 3 years ago. The gala was her way of keeping his name attached to something good. She always wore navy blue on these nights because it had been his favorite color on her. She always stood near the entrance for the first hour because she believed the host should be the first person guests saw and the last one they remembered. She was good at this. She was good at most things that required patience and structure. 15 years as a forensic financial analyst had trained her to hold very still while she looked. Patrick was across the room. Her husband of 6 years was standing near the bar with a glass of red wine and a smile that lit up his whole face. He was tall and well-dressed, and he knew how to work a room. That had been one of the first things she noticed about him, how comfortable he was anywhere. He had that rare quality of making whoever he was talking to feel like the most interesting person in the building. She had found it charming once. She still found it charming. That was one of the harder things about all of this. He was talking to a woman in a green dress. Renee Akefer. Marble knew her by sight. Renee was a pharmaceutical sales representative, mid-30s, polished, with the kind of smile that came from years of selling things to people who did not always want to buy. She had been at all 3 galas. She always found a reason to stop by and speak to Marble, a brief exchange, a warm handshake, a comment about how beautiful the event was, how meaningful the cause. Marble had always assumed she was simply networking. She was watching Patrick laugh at something Renee said when she felt a light touch on her arm. She turned. The woman beside her was small and old, with silver hair pinned under a navy security cap and a face that had the particular stillness of someone who had seen everything and was no longer surprised by any of it. Her name tag read AGNESTULL Security. She was holding a paper cup of coffee in both hands, and she was looking not at Marble but across the room, at Patrick. Is that your husband? Agnes said. Her voice was calm, not unkind, the way a doctor sounds when they have already read the results and are deciding how to say it. Marble looked at her. Yes, she said. Agnes nodded once slowly. She took a small sip of her coffee. Then she said, Come with me. You need to see this with your eyes. She said it the way someone says come out of the rain. Simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to say to a woman in a navy evening gown in the middle of her own event. Marble looked back across the room. Patrick was still laughing. Renee was touching his arm the way women touch the arm of someone they are very comfortable with. It was a small gesture. Most people would not have noticed it. Marble noticed it. She set down her untouched sparkling water on the tray of a passing server. She followed Agnes Tull out of the ballroom and down the main corridor, away from the light and the music, toward a part of the hospital that guests never saw. She did not know yet what she was walking toward. She only knew that something in Agnes's voice had settled in her chest like a stone that had been there for a long time, waiting to be named. Chapter 2. The room at the end of the hall. Agnes Tull walked the way people walk when they have been navigating the same building for 30 years, without looking, turning corners before they appeared, pausing at doors before she opened them. She did not speak during the walk. She seemed to understand that Marble did not need conversation right now. She needed space. They went down 2 flights of stairs in the east wing, through a set of fire doors that Agnes opened with a key card worn smooth from daily use, and down a corridor that smelled faintly of old carpet and circulated air. The noise from the gala had faded completely. Down here, it was just the low hum of the building doing what buildings do. Agnes stopped at a door marked Security, MONITORING, Staff Only. She unlocked it and held it open for Marble the way she might hold open a door at church. The room was small. 2 walls of shelving held outdated equipment, old tape drives, labeled binders, a small television mounted in the corner that was not on. In the center was a desk with a modern monitor and a tower computer that looked recently installed. 2 chairs. A box of tissues on the shelf beside the door that had not been opened yet. Agnes sat in the chair behind the desk. She gestured for Marble to sit in the one beside her. She did not look nervous. She looked like a woman who had been thinking about this moment for 3 weeks and had decided it was the right thing to do. "I have been here 31 years, Agnes said. She was logging into the computer as she spoke. "I have seen people be born in this hospital and I have seen people die. Most of what I see stays with me and goes nowhere because most of the time there is nothing to be done about it. People make choices. That is their business." She pulled up a folder on the screen. 3 weeks ago, the IT department ran a server migration. They were moving old archived footage to a new storage system. The old cameras in the East Wing stairwells, they were replaced 7 years ago. But the footage from the original system was never deleted. It had just been sitting in the archive unreviewed. She paused. Nobody had ever looked at it. "But you did," Marble said. "I was asked to verify the transfer log. I had to confirm each file had moved correctly. That meant opening some of them." Agnes looked at the screen. "I know this hospital. I know who belongs where. When I opened the file from the east stairwell, floor 3 to 4, dated the night your father died, I recognized the man I just saw standing at the bar in the ballroom." Marble was very still. "I did not come to you straight away," Agnes said. "I am not a young woman and I know what it feels like to have someone come to you with something like this. I wanted to be sure I was not mistaken. I watched it 4 times. Then I waited until tonight, because tonight was the only time I would be certain he would be in the building and I could confirm with my own eyes." She looked at Marble now directly. "Your husband was in that stairwell the night your father died. The timestamp is 11:47 p.m. Your father's cardiac episode was recorded at 12:03 a.m. That is 16 minutes. She said it flat, like a fact, not an accusation. "I am not a detective. I am not a doctor. I am not saying I understand what it means. I am saying you need to see it with your eyes." She moved the mouse and double-clicked a file. The screen lit up with gray footage, the grainy, high-contrast look of an old camera in a low-light space. A stairwell, concrete walls, a single overhead bulb. The timestamp in the corner read the date Marble knew by heart. She had been upstairs in room 412 that night. She remembered the sound of the monitor. She remembered the nurse coming in at 5 minutes past midnight and saying the words that rewrote her life. Agnes pressed play. Marble watched the screen. She watched the door at the bottom of the frame open. She watched a man walk in. She watched his face turn toward the camera for just a moment, not long, just a second, as he checked that the landing was clear. It was Patrick. She recognized the gray jacket. She had bought him that jacket. Chapter 3. The tape. Agnes let the footage run without commentary. She seemed to understand that some things needed to be seen completely before they were discussed. On the screen, Patrick stood on the landing between the 3rd and 4th floors. He was facing the door, his back mostly to the camera, but the angle was wide enough to catch his profile when he turned his head. He checked his phone. He put it back in his pocket. He stood very still in the way that people stand when they are waiting for something they are certain is coming. 40 seconds after Patrick entered the frame, the door opened again. The woman who walked in wore a lanyard, a visitor pass. She was carrying a small tote bag. She moved quickly with purpose, not rushed, but deliberate. She kept her head slightly down as she crossed the landing toward Patrick. Renee Akefer. Even in the gray footage, with the soft blur of the old camera, Marble knew her. The way she carried herself, that particular upright posture of someone who had spent years walking into rooms and convincing people, it was recognizable. She had watched Renee walk into 3 galas with that same quiet confidence. Patrick and Renee did not embrace. They did not kiss. There was none of the warmth Marble might have expected if this were simply 2 people in love conducting an affair in a stairwell. This looked like a meeting. Business. Renee reached into her tote bag and produced a small white envelope. She held it out. Patrick took it. He opened it slightly, looked at whatever was inside, and nodded. Then Patrick reached into the breast pocket of the gray jacket and produced a folded document. He handed it to Renee. She unfolded it partially, enough to scan it, then folded it back and placed it in the tote bag. They spoke for what the timestamp confirmed was 1 minute and 58 seconds. Then Renee left. Then Patrick left. The stairwell was empty again. Agnes stopped the footage. The room was very quiet. "What was in the envelope?" Marble asked. Her voice came out steady. She was aware that it should not have, and she was grateful for it anyway. "I do not know," Agnes said. "I only know what I saw." She clasped her hands on the desk. "I do know that the woman in this footage has been coming to your gala every year. I have checked her and myself twice. She is registered as a pharmaceutical sales representative with a company called Bridgerton Medical Group. She carries the same tote bag she is carrying in that footage." Agnes paused. This year she arrived before any other guest. She was the 3rd person through the door. Marble thought about Renee shaking her hand this evening. The firm grip, the warm smile, the comment about the flower arrangements, how lovely they were, how much detail had clearly gone into the event. She thought about shaking that hand and saying thank you and meaning it. "There is something else," Agnes said. She minimized the footage and opened a second file, a still image, captured from another camera, a parking lot. The timestamp was 2 weeks ago. "Her car has been in the long-term lot for 34 days, Agnes said. "It is registered to Renee Akefer. The lot is for patients and families of patients in long-term care. She is not visiting any patient. She pays the fee by automatic card renewal and the car just sits there." Agnes pointed to an area of the still image, the dashboard of the car, visible through the windscreen. "3 weeks ago I noticed something on the dashboard. I could not be certain from the outside, but it looked like a flash drive. I have checked 3 times since then. It has not moved." Marble looked at the image. There was a small rectangle sitting just at the base of the windscreen on the passenger side. Silver, small, it could have been anything, but it had been sitting there for weeks. "Why would she leave that?" Marble said, thinking out loud, not really asking Agnes. Agnes folded her hands. "I have been wondering that myself. The way I see it, there are only 2 reasons to leave something like that in a visible place for a long time. Either you forgot about it or you left it there for someone to find." Marble was quiet for a moment. "Can you take me to the car?" she asked. Chapter 4. The car in the parking lot. Agnes took her the long way through the back of the east wing, out through a service exit, and along the side of the building to the long-term parking lot. The lot was half empty at this hour. The evening air was cool and sharp. Somewhere above the glow of the lot lights, the sky was a deep clear blue. Marble walked with her hands at her sides, her evening gown brushing the ground. She had left her clutch at the gala. She realized this now and felt a brief, strange calm about it, because her phone was inside the clutch and she did not want her phone right now. She did not want to call anyone. She did not want to read anything. She wanted to see with her own eyes, as Agnes had said. The car was a dark gray sedan, parked in a row near the back of the lot. An ordinary car. Nothing about it suggested anything except someone who had been away long enough to collect a thin film of parking lot dust on the hood. Agnes stood a few feet back. She had already done her part. She did not lean in. She watched Marble the way a person watches someone open a door they helped unlock a present, but respectful enough to stay at a distance. Marble approached the driver's side and bent slightly to look through the window. The flash drive was there. It was sitting on the dashboard, leaning against the base of the windscreen, slightly tilted to the left. Silver, small, with a black cap. The kind of thing that came free with a conference registration bag. Unremarkable in almost every way except that it had been sitting in a parked car in a hospital lot for over a month. Marble straightened up. She looked at Agnes. Agnes said nothing, which was the right thing. The passenger side window had a crack along the bottom edge, old, weathered, the kind of crack that had been there for years. Marble walked around the car, crouched beside the passenger window, and examined the crack. It was wide enough at one end that a thin card could fit through. She looked at Agnes again. "The window has been like that since the car arrived," Agnes said quietly. "I measured it once. Old habit." Marble reached into the pocket of her gown. She had sewn a pocket into every formal gown she owned. A habit from years of working events where she needed to keep her hands free, and found a thin business card. She slid it through the gap, angled it, and used the edge of the card to nudge the flash drive slowly toward the crack. It took 4 attempts. On the 5th, the drive slid close enough to the window edge that she could reach 2 fingers through and lift it out. She held it in her palm. It was lighter than she expected. She looked up at the hospital building. Somewhere above them, 300 people were still eating dinner and talking about George Webb's legacy, and being moved by the slideshow of his photographs that played on a loop in the corner of the ballroom. Patrick was up there. Renee was up there. They were both standing in the light that was supposed to honor her father. Marble closed her fingers around the flash drive and put it in her pocket. "Thank you," she said to Agnes, genuinely. Agnes nodded. "You take care of yourself tonight," she said. "The rest can wait until morning." Marble walked back through the service entrance, back through the East Wing corridor, back up the stairs and into the ballroom. She picked up her clutch from where she had set it near the entrance. She straightened her gown. She smiled at the first person who made eye contact with her, a surgeon she had known for years who was saying something kind about her father. She listened. She responded. She made a small joke that landed well enough to draw a brief laugh. She shook 3 hands before the evening ended. One of them was Renee Acaffer's. Renee squeezed her hand and said, "Same time next year, I hope," with a warm smile. "Same time next year," Marble said, and smiled back. Chapter 5. What she carried home. Patrick fell asleep by 11:30. He did this on gala nights. The wine and the socializing and the long drive back settled him quickly. Within 20 minutes of them arriving home, she could hear him breathing steadily from the bedroom. She had said she was going to read for a while. He had said good night without questioning it. He never questioned things like that. She had always taken that for trust. She sat at the desk in her home office with the door closed and her smallest laptop, the personal one, not the work machine, open on the desk. She took the flash drive from her pocket and set it down under the lamp. She looked at it for a moment. Then she picked it up and inserted it into the port on the side of the laptop. It loaded immediately. No password, no encryption, just a folder with a plain name, Hold. There were 14 files inside. She opened the first one. It was an email chain between an address she did not recognize and one she did, Patrick's personal email, the one he used for things he considered separate from their shared life. She had only ever seen it on his phone when he left it face up on the counter. She had never thought much of it. People were allowed separate email accounts. People were allowed private things. The chain went back 4 years. It began with a message from the unrecognized address. Later she would confirm it was Renee that read simply, "The meeting with the contact went well. He is willing. What is the next step?" Patrick's reply, "We wait until the time is closer. I will manage the paperwork side. You handle yours." She read the chain to its end. She read it a second time. She did not understand every reference. There were gaps, coded language, things that only made sense as part of a larger picture. But she understood enough. She opened the second file. It was a financial transfer record, a transfer of $40,000 from a numbered company to a personal account. The numbered company name was listed, 4812 Holdings Limited. The personal account was listed by the last four digits of the account number. She did not recognize those digits as belonging to any account she shared with Patrick. She wrote them on a notepad. Third file. A scanned copy of a beneficiary amendment form for her father's life insurance policy, a policy she had not even known Patrick was aware of in detail, because she handled all the family's financial documents herself. The form was signed in a version of her father's handwriting that was close but not right. She had grown up watching her father sign things. She knew the slight leftward angle of his capital G, the way he finished his last name with a slight upward tail. This signature had neither. The amendment redirected 30% of the policy value to 4812 Holdings Limited. The policy had paid out 3 months after George Webb's death. Marble had received 70%. She had never questioned the amount because she had never looked at the original beneficiary document to compare. She had assumed the policy was straightforward. She had been grieving. Fourth file, a medical document. She was not a doctor, and some of the language was clinical enough that she could not fully parse it on her own. But she could read dates and names and order numbers. She could see that a medication order bearing the name of her father's cardiologist, the order that governed his overnight cardiac monitoring dose, carried an order number and a date, and she could compare it to what she had memorized from the official documents she received from the hospital after his death. The order number did not match. She sat back in her chair. The lamp on the desk was the only light on in the house. Outside the window, the street was empty and very quiet. She did not cry. She had never been the kind of person who cried as a first response. Grief was something she experienced at a slight delay, first the facts, then the understanding, then the feeling. Right now she was still in the facts. She copied every file onto her laptop's hard drive and added a second copy to her backup cloud account. Then she removed the flash drive and held it in her hand. She thought about what Agnes had said. Either you forgot about it, or you left it there for someone to find. She thought about why Renee Ackhafer might leave evidence in a parked car. Either Renee had panicked and abandoned the car, or Renee had decided, for reasons Marble did not yet understand, that she wanted someone to find this. She put the flash drive in the locked drawer of her desk, under a folder of old tax records. She turned off the lamp and sat in the dark for a while. Then she got up, went to the bedroom, and lay down beside her sleeping husband. She looked at the ceiling. She listened to him breathe. In the morning, she would make a phone call. Chapter 6. Marble before the storm. People who did not know Marble Webb well often made the mistake of thinking she was simply organized. She had the kind of calm that read, at a surface level, as tidiness. She kept clean notes. She met deadlines. She never raised her voice in a disagreement. Colleagues assumed this meant she was careful. She was, but careful was not the right word for what she was doing when she went quiet. She had grown up watching her father work. George Webb had been an accountant before he became a hospital donor and a community figure, and his first lesson to her, repeated from the time she was 9 years old, was that numbers did not lie on their own. Numbers were honest. It was people who bent them. And if you understood how numbers were supposed to behave, you could always see the moment someone had bent one. She had taken that lesson and built a career on it. 15 years of forensic financial work. She had reviewed fraud cases for insurance companies, testified in 2 federal proceedings, and written an analysis methodology that 3 accounting firms had adopted. She was, in the plainest terms, someone whose job was to find the thing that had been hidden and explain it clearly to people who needed to act on it. She had spent the last 3 years grieving her father and running her practice and managing her marriage and organizing a memorial gala, without once turning her professional eye toward her own life. She saw that now. She thought about Patrick. She had met him at a conference in Baltimore. He had been presenting on nonprofit financial governance, and she had asked a sharp question from the floor, and he had smiled at her like she was exactly the person he had been hoping would show up. They had dinner that night. They had talked until the hotel restaurant closed. She had thought, driving home the next morning, that she had met someone who understood the value of being thorough. She had not been wrong about his intelligence. She had been wrong about what he was using it for. 6 years of marriage. No children. They had agreed to wait, and the waiting had stretched, and somewhere in the stretching, Marble had begun to feel the distance between them without being able to name its shape. She had attributed it to work, to the grief of losing her father, to the natural quietening of a long relationship. She had never attributed it to this. She thought about the 14 files, the email chain going back 4 years. That meant this had been in motion before her father's death, before the hospital admission, before the cardiac episode that the nurses had called sudden and unexpected given his overall condition. She thought about the medical order with the wrong number. She did not have a medical degree. She could not diagnose what that document meant on her own, but she knew how to find the right people, and she knew that the right people needed to see it. She made the phone call at 7 in the morning. She called Claudette Owens, who had been her closest friend since their first year of university and who had spent the past 12 years as a forensic attorney. They had referred cases to each other for a decade. They trusted each other completely. "Claude," she said when Claudette picked up, "I need to meet with you today, not as a colleague, as a client." A brief pause. "What kind of case?" Claudette asked. "Insurance fraud, possible document forgery, potentially something worse that I cannot name yet." Another pause. "Are you safe?" "Yes, I am in my own house and I am perfectly fine. I just need someone I trust to look at what I have before I decide how to move." "I will be at your office by 9, Claudette said. Marble was already showered and dressed when Patrick came downstairs at 8. She made him coffee. She asked about his schedule. She listened to his answer. She kissed him on the cheek when he left for work, and she watched his car pull out of the driveway, and then she went to her desk and unlocked the drawer. Chapter 7. The Investigation. Claudette arrived at 9 with a leather briefcase and the focused expression she wore in court, not hostile, just cleared of everything unnecessary. She sat across from Marble at the office desk, put on her reading glasses, and went through the 14 files in silence. She did not react until she reached the medical document. Then she took off her glasses, pinched the bridge of her nose, and set them down on the desk. "Marble, I know. This is. I know. I need you to tell me what I can do and what I cannot do, and I need you to tell me how to do the most without making a single mistake." Claudette put her glasses back on. "All right, walk me through the night you got this." Marble walked her through everything. Agnes, the security room, the footage, the parking lot, the flash drive. She was precise. She did not editorialize. She gave Claudette the same kind of account she would give a client who needed clarity, chronological, clean, nothing added that was not confirmed. Claudette listened without interrupting. When Marble finished, Claudette opened her briefcase and took out a legal pad. "First step is to retain a private investigator. I have someone I use regularly. His name is Darnell Foster. He is thorough, and he understands how to gather evidence that holds up. I will contact him today." Darnell Foster was brought into the case by that afternoon. He was a compact, quiet man in his 40s who had spent 12 years in financial crimes investigation before going independent. He reviewed the files, asked 12 precise questions, and said he could begin immediately. The first thread was the numbered company, 4812 Holdings Limited. Darnell traced it inside a week. It was a shell company registered in a state that required minimal disclosure. The registered agent was a generic legal services firm, the kind that charged a flat fee and asked no questions. but the underlying ownership record, accessed through a combination of public filings, and a contact Darnell had at the relevant state office, showed two beneficial owners. One was Patrick Webb. The other was a holding entity registered in a different state, which in turn was owned by a trust whose named beneficiary was, with one layer of paperwork between them, Renee Ackafer's brother, a man named Tobias Ackafer. Patrick and Renee had built a structure together. That structure had received 30% of George Webb's life insurance payout. The second thread was the medical document. Claudette contacted a medical records expert, someone she had used in 2 previous cases involving falsified hospital documentation. The expert reviewed the scanned order from the flash drive and compared it against the official record Marble had in her father's file. The conclusion was careful and qualified but clear. The order numbers came from different batches, indicating the document on the flash drive was produced at a different time from the one in the official file. The official file document appeared to have replaced an earlier order. The original order, if genuine, would have maintained a higher dose of the medication managing George Webb's cardiac rhythm. A reduced dosage, particularly in an unmonitored window, could have created conditions under which a cardiac episode became more severe than it otherwise would have been. The expert would not say this was certainly what happened. Medicine had too many variables for that, but she said it was enough to warrant a formal clinical review. The third thread was Agnes. Claudette sat down with Agnes Tull formally, with Agnes's consent and the presence of a union representative from the hospital's security staff. Agnes gave her account clearly and calmly. She had been doing this job for 31 years. She understood what she had seen, and she was prepared to stand behind it. She had already made a copy of the footage before the IT migration completed and stored it on her personal external drive at home, because she had the kind of careful nature that came from working security for 3 decades. The copy was clean. The timestamp was intact. The footage was authenticated by a digital forensics analyst Darnell brought in. Patrick Webb's face was confirmed by the analyst as matching a reference photograph with 97% confidence. Marble reviewed every finding. She signed off on every step. She and Claudette agreed that they would not move on Patrick directly until the insurance company had been notified and the hospital's compliance office had been separately engaged. They needed the institutions moving before Patrick had any reason to believe he was under scrutiny. They gave themselves 3 weeks. Chapter 8. Patrick starts to feel it. Marble had always been good at being still. Stillness was, in her professional life, a tool. When she was reviewing a case, she did not telegraph what she was finding. She asked plain questions. She listened to plain answers. She did not let her face say anything her mouth had not decided to say first. This was what she did now in her own home for 3 weeks. Patrick was not a stupid man. That was the complicated thing. He had built something genuinely intricate, a scheme that had layers, that used legitimate-looking paperwork that had been executed with patience. He had managed to sustain it alongside a marriage and a public life and a reputation as the kind of man who showed up to hospital galas and smiled warmly at the staff. He was not careless by nature. But even careful people relax when they believe they have one. He had received the insurance payout through 4812 Holdings 3 years ago. He had continued the marriage with no disruption. He had attended every gala, played every role, and never, as far as he knew, been looked at too closely. 3 years without a knock on the door had made him comfortable. And comfortable people miss things. Darnell photographed Patrick and Renee at a hotel outside the city on a Wednesday afternoon, 11 days into the investigation. They met in the hotel bar, stayed for 90 minutes and left separately. Darnell photographed the same meeting 4 days later, same hotel, different table. He photographed the license plates. He photographed Patrick's car in the hotel lot. He filed his report with Claudette and noted that the meetings appeared to be logistical in nature, not romantic outings, but working sessions between two people managing something ongoing. That something, Darnell believed, was the question of Renee's car and whatever was still in it. Patrick did not know Marble had the flash drive, but Renee knew the drive was in the car, and she appeared to be growing nervous about it. On a Monday, $15,000 moved out of the joint account. Marble saw the notification on her banking app at 6 in the morning. She put her phone face down on the nightstand and looked at the ceiling for 60 seconds. Then she picked up the phone and forwarded the notification to Claudette with a single line: "He is moving money." Claudette's reply came 6 minutes later: "Good, let it happen. Do not move anything from your side, document only." Marble left the notification unmentioned at breakfast. Patrick poured himself coffee and talked about a meeting he had that afternoon. He seemed relaxed. She watched him and thought about how little she had actually known about what was behind his eyes during all the years she had thought she knew him well. The insurance company's investigative unit had by now received Claudette's formal complaint, supported by the forensic evidence from the flash drive and the digital copy of the amended beneficiary form. They had opened a fraud review and engaged their own investigators quietly. The lead investigator called Claudette and confirmed they had identified the account number associated with 4812 Holdings and were cross-referencing the payout against their internal fraud detection thresholds. The payout had, at the time, triggered a minor flag that was dismissed after a phone call with Patrick, who had presented himself as a knowledgeable family representative and said the beneficiary amendment was a recent change George Webb had made voluntarily before his decline. Nobody had verified that claim against the original policy documents. They were doing it now. The hospital's compliance office had also received the anonymous tip, a brief, carefully worded note from Claudette's office that did not name Patrick or Renee, but described the specific discrepancy in George Webb's medical order number and asked for an internal review of the relevant file. The compliance officer had escalated it to the medical records audit team within 48 hours. The walls were moving. Patrick could not feel them yet. But Renee could. Darnell noted this in his report. She had begun visiting the hospital lot twice in the past week, driving past without parking, slowing near the row where her car sat. She never stopped. She never got out. She was checking whether the car was still there. It was still there. So was the evidence, all of it, safe in the hands of people who knew exactly what to do with it. Chapter 9. The walls come down. It began on a Tuesday morning, which was an ordinary kind of day to have everything change. At 9 a.m., two investigators from the State Financial Crimes Unit, working alongside the insurance company's fraud team, arrived at the office building where Patrick kept a small consultancy he had been running for the past 4 years. They had a warrant to examine his business records. They were polite and precise, and they told him he was not under arrest. This was a financial investigation, and his cooperation was invited. Patrick called a lawyer from the hallway outside his office, while the investigators waited inside. At 11 a.m., the hospital's medical records audit team completed their review of George Webb's file and escalated their findings to the compliance director, who called the state health board. The discrepancy in the medication order was confirmed. The document in the official file had been substituted. The original order, retrieved from a backup archive, showed a higher dosage than the substituted one, a dosage that would have provided stronger cardiac protection during the overnight window in which George Webb's episode occurred. The compliance director also contacted the hospital's legal team and the local police department's healthcare fraud division. At 1 p.m., Renee Acaffer received notice that her pharmaceutical sales license was under emergency suspension pending investigation. The notification came from the State Pharmaceutical Licensing Board, which had been contacted by two separate parties. the insurance fraud unit and the health board within the same morning. She called her own lawyer. She went home. She did not return to the hospital lot. By 3 p.m., Patrick's personal accounts had been flagged by the Financial Crimes Unit and frozen pending the investigation's outcome. The joint account was untouched. Claudette had ensured that Marble's legal interest in it was filed before any freeze could be applied. Claudette called Marble at 3:15. "It has started," she said. "I know," Marble said. She was sitting in her office with a cup of tea that had gone cold. She had been watching the updates come through on her phone all morning. "When do we file?" "Divorce papers are ready. We can file this afternoon." "File them." The papers were filed at 4 p.m. Patrick was served by the end of the day. Claudette's cover letter to Patrick's lawyer was 3 paragraphs long and referenced the fraud investigation, the flash drive evidence, the forged beneficiary amendment, the medical order discrepancy, and the authenticated footage of Patrick in the hospital stairwell. It invited him to cooperate fully and noted that any attempt to contact Marble directly would be treated as harassment. Marble did not hear from Patrick that evening. He sent one message at 9:30 p.m. She did not open it. She forwarded it directly to Claudette. She made herself dinner. She sat at her kitchen table, which was a table she had chosen herself years before they married, which she had always loved the look of in the morning light, and she ate her dinner and looked out the window at the dark garden. She was not happy. She was not sad either. She was the way she always was after a long piece of work finally came together, quiet and very clear, and ready for whatever came next. Renee Acaffer contacted the investigators 4 days later and agreed to cooperate in exchange for reduced charges. Her cooperation confirmed what the documents suggested. She had access to the hospital's medication order system through a contact who has since faced separate charges. She had substituted the document. Patrick had handled the financial and insurance side. The plan had been conceived over a year before George Webb's health declined. Marble read the summary Claudette sent her and put her phone face down on the desk. She thought about her father, about room 412, about the nurse at 5 past midnight. She sat with it for a while, then she put on her coat and went for a long walk. Chapter 10. Marble walks into the light. 3 months later, on a gray October morning, Patrick Webb stood in a federal courtroom and pleaded guilty to insurance fraud, conspiracy to commit financial fraud, and 1 count of conspiracy to interfere with medical care. A charge that the prosecutors had worked hard to build, and that carried the most weight of everything. He received a sentence of 7 years. His attorney had negotiated it down from the maximum. His cooperation with the investigation of the wider scheme, including the contact inside the hospital who had enabled the document substitution, had been taken into account. He would serve a minimum of 4 before becoming eligible for review. His consultancy was dissolved. His professional licenses were revoked. Renee Acaffer received 3 years, suspended to 18 months with full cooperation completed and a permanent bar from pharmaceutical practice. She had given a full account. Her license was gone. Her career in the industry was finished. The insurance settlement was reviewed and recalculated. The 30% that had been redirected to 4812 Holdings Limited was recovered in full through the fraud judgment. Combined with damages and the correction of the original payout, the total amount returned to Marble's legal estate, which she had structured through Claudette to sit in a dedicated account, came to significantly more than the original policy value. She instructed Claudette to redirect a portion to the Greenville General Hospital Foundation in her father's name, increasing the endowment by enough to fund a new cardiac monitoring program. The divorce was finalized on a Wednesday. Marble signed the papers at Claudette's office, and then they went out for lunch, just the 2 of them, at the kind of restaurant where the light through the windows is very clear and clean, and the food takes its time and you can hear yourself think. They did not talk about Patrick or Renee. They talked about Claudette's new case, about Marble's plans for her practice, about a film they had both been meaning to see. They split the bill evenly, which was what they always did. Agnes Tull received a letter of commendation from the hospital's board of directors. She also received, from Marble personally, a handwritten note and a standing invitation to the memorial gala for as long as Marble ran it. Agnes wrote back in a brief, precise note that said she appreciated both and intended to be there every year for as long as her knees allowed. The fourth annual George Webb Memorial Gala was held on a Tuesday evening in the Greenville General Ballroom. The chandeliers threw clean white light across 280 guests. Marble stood near the arched entrance for the first hour, as she always did, in a navy gown, her father's favorite color on her. The event was everything she had designed it to be. The slideshow played in the corner. The cardiologist who had been her father's doctor for 12 years gave a short and genuine speech. The new monitoring equipment, whose funding plaque read in memory of George Webb, was unveiled in the cardiac wing at 7:30 and drew a brief, warm round of applause. At 8 o'clock, Agnes came in through the main door in her Navy security cap and her pressed uniform and took her usual post near the corridor entrance. She caught Marble's eye across the room and gave a single small nod. Marble nodded back. She looked around the room at the 300 people who had come to remember her father, who had lived honestly and given generously and left something real in the world. She thought about what he had told her when she was 9. Numbers don't lie on their own. It was people who bent them. And if you understood how they were supposed to behave, you could always find the bend. She had found it. She had straightened it. She had done what needed to be done, not loudly, not dramatically, not with anything she was not prepared to explain in full in a courtroom. And she had come out on the other side of it with her name clean, her father's name clear, and every single thing that was hers. A guest she had not seen in 2 years came through the entrance and lit up when they saw her. "Marble, you look wonderful." She smiled. It was a real smile. She was noticing, more and more, how easy that had become again, not something she had to produce on demand, but something that simply arrived when the moment called for it. "Thank you," she said. "I feel it." She handed the guest a program and turned to welcome the next person coming through the door. The night was clear, the light was bright. She was exactly where she was supposed to be.